Hello, this is Dave Redder. This is a series of videos titled Building Database CRUD APIs. It's a series of videos about CRUD, APIs, PHP, MySQL, and other things like that, other technologies. The technologies we're going to use to describe this concept are MySQL Workbench, which you're looking at right now, NetBeans, which is a free download, as is MySQL Workbench. And this is an integrated development environment, an IDE, and we'll use Google Chrome and maybe some other little tools here and there. But the primary purpose of this is not to teach you about MySQL or to teach you about SQL or to teach you about databases, is to teach you a way to go about providing programmatic access to a database, and in this case we're going to use a MySQL database in a way that is both extensible, scalable, and practical. And so with that in mind, let me talk a little bit about what we're looking at right here. This is the same kind of a tool that you might be using with some other database management service system. I'm using MySQL here, which is also a free download. But you may be used to Microsoft SQL Server, in which case you might be using SQL Server Management Studio. Does the same kinds of things as this product that we're looking at right here does, except that it does it in somewhat different ways. I'm not concerned with that with this video. So let's take a look at what's going on here that kind of raises the question about how could we do this better. If we were to want to have a database, you'll notice, I'll even refresh this, you'll notice that there's nothing here in this database. DBDemo is the database I'm going to use. It's bold, and if it isn't bold in your world, you should double click on it. But what I want to do is create a table. And I'm going to create a table like this. I'm going to call the table test. And I'm going to give it 3 columns. The first column is going to be ID. It's going to be an int and a primary key. And it's not allowed to be null. That stands for not null. The next one is going to be first, for first name. I'll just leave it at var character of 45. And the next one will be last. And that's all I'm doing, just those 3 fields, because that's all I really care about right now. And I don't even care what fields they are. I'm just simply showing how a table is created and the things that happen sort of behind the scenes that we're going to try to take over ourselves rather than use Workbench. Click on Apply, and this is what Workbench generates. This is not Workbench's structure. This is SQL structure. And this is well defined in the SQL world, and different vendors of SQL or of SQL database management systems have different formats, but not usually on something like this. But we'll see something here in a little bit that is a little bit different. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that and paste it, or copy it, and I'll paste it in a minute. But when I click on Apply, it goes through its business, lets us know when it's done, and now you'll see that we have this table here called test. And if we look at test, you can see that it's simply a table. It's got an ID, a first and a last column, and we create these items in here, and I'm sure you understand what that's about. But the goal is not so much to pull that off here, but rather to be able to pull it off in a language like C# or C++ or Java, or perhaps in PHP, which is the language we're going to use. So what we need to do is we need to create a statement that looks like that in our language, whatever our language of choice, and cause that statement to be sent to the database management system so that it can then execute the statement and cause the intent of the statement to be carried out within the database. So if you look at it clearly or carefully here, this is the name of the database. That's the name of the table. That's the name of the first column, which is an integer column that's not allowed to have null values. The ID column, and it's the first one. This is the second column whose name is first, and it's a var character 45, meaning you can have up to 45 characters in this column. It is allowed to be null. And last, the same kind of thing. And then it says the primary key is ID. we need to take that and convert it into a variable, so where we can store this string. Well, it turns out that with PHP at least, you can leave these little backwards apostrophes in there, but they're ugly, so I'm going to get rid of them. And I'm just simply going to do that by clicking on Edit, Replace that backwards apostrophe with nothing every place you find it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put quotes around this thing. And make it the value in something called query string. So now I've got, if this was an active PHP file, I don't even have this in PHP brackets, I've got the ability now to create this thing called query string and store that string in it. If I could get that to get sent to the database management system of my choice and get executed over there, we'd have something. So let's go take a look at something that's that deals with precisely that. This is a collection of actually two things. Let me knock that down that way. And the two things are, and we're going to go look at all that, so I mean later. This is pretty much parts 1 and 2, and this is part 3. But what we're going to do is talk about the CRUD, the create, read, update, and delete methods that have to happen or need to happen within a database regarding the tables that it owns. So we're going to deal in some kind of specific terms with it first, and we're going to make it better later. First thing that we have to be able to do is to connect to the database. And connect to database is really quite simple in MySQL, or in PHP with MySQL as the collection of methods. There's a method that's built right into PHP called MySQL connect, and it allows you to connect to a server somewhere in the internet world. So all we have to do is send it the server's name or ID, IP address, the username and password of the person who has access or the credentials to access this server, and the name of the database, and that user also has to have credentials to access that database. But given all those things, then this thing should in fact create a connection to that server that is then able to execute commands on the server on that database. The way I've implemented this is so that I don't have to show my credentials and my server ID and all of that in a public forum. And so what I want to do is just simply show you what it looks like. I've got it in this file called demo-creds.php, and that's the real stuff, and you can see that it's up here in demo. But I've also got a thing like it in sample creds, and this is, I just copied demo creds and then pasted in some, or typed in some different values. But this would be the username Bob, and this would be whatever Bob's password is. This would be the name of the demo, or of the demo database, and this is the IP address of the server. If the server has a well-known name, then you could also put that in there. Well, you could put that in there instead. So with that in mind, we're not going to look at that anymore. What I want to do is I want to execute that statement. Notice that it then checks if there are errors, then this thing's not going to be null. And so if that's true, a truthy value as it's put in PHP, then it's going to echo failed to connect to MySQL, and it's going to give us the error for that. And if it's a falsy value, that means that there were no errors, and so it's going to say the connection was successful. So let's just run this thing. And what I'm going to do is have it execute on my default browser, which is Chrome. And you just come down here and click on Run File. And when I do that, this is what Chrome ends up telling me. Connection successful. And it's simply that piece right there that got echoed onto this Chrome screen. I'm going to use this quite a lot, so I'll drag it in when it needs to be dragged in. Hopefully you'll trust me that I didn't do anything behind closed doors there to trick you. So if we look at this, here are the CRUD operations that we would expect to be able to do in MySQL. We expect to be able to create a table. This one is one that a lot of people don't know, but it's called describe, and it describes the table. It's essentially the read operation on tables. Describe and explain are the same in MySQL. They're different in some other. They behave differently in Oracle, but describe and explain are the same in MySQL. Update table allows us to change what's in the table, not the content, but change the structure of the table. And delete table just says get rid of it. So, or drop table does. So we're going to take a look at these, but we're only going to take a look at a couple of them first, and then we're going to change our thinking a little bit. So let's take a look at this. This is create table, and I've commented it out so I could give you that first demo there, but now I'm going to comment it back in, if I can grab that, and we're going to run this. Notice that this thing right here, that statement right there, I built that just like I built that statement right there. All I did was just bring it over, get rid of those funny backward apostrophes, and put quotes around it. Set its value into query string, and now I'm going to echo the query string. When I'm done echoing the query string, then I'm going to do the magic. The magic is that when we load this file, you'll notice that none of these things are protected from anything. They're just right out there in global space within the file. And as a result, PHP, because it's a PHP file, PHP is going to process those, going to execute these commands. So PHP is actually going to create this MySQL I string or object, and it's going to create it based on the result of this thing. This turns out to be a thing called a connection object, and that connection object is going to be useful for us. You can see that I'm using it down here. And so that connection object, if things worked out well, is going to be what's used down here to cause something to happen. And what we're going to cause to happen is that we're going to create this test table. So what I want to do is, before we do that, I want to come over here and delete that test table. So I'm going to right click on it, come over here and drop it now, and you'll notice that now it's gone. Even if I refresh, there's no table there, but there will be, hopefully, when we come back and execute this code. So my goal is to save all of that. Then I'm going to bring this guy back in over here. This is the browser that we had before, and I'm going to refresh it. And there's what happened. It rewrote this. It says, connection was successful. And then on this part, it said, echo this query string. And it did. It said, create table. I didn't do anything here to test for errors, which I should have probably, but this is not intended to be that kind of a video. Create table, test. There's ID, first, last. And the primary key is the ID. That's exactly what it says in there. That's the query string. Notice that it doesn't have any new lines in like it does up here. But that's the query string. So how are we going to know if that worked? Well, I don't have anything on that display, but I can sure come over here and see that it worked by refreshing this now. And there's our test table. And if we go look at it, let's get rid of this old one here. Let's right click and select the top rows. You can see that I've got this table. It's empty. I could also take a look at the alter table and see that I get essentially the same window, except that it allows me to alter an existing one rather than to create a new one. So we've come quite a ways already to be able to successfully connect to the database and create a table. There's other things that we would like to be able to do with that, but they are maybe not what we're talking about here. But the three things we want to do are read, update, and delete. And I'm not talking about putting things in the table as update. I'm not talking about inserting tuples and such. What I'm talking about is read the table to find out what it looks like. That's what this is about. So if I come here and look at describe, it turns out that there is a describe command in SQL, in MySQL, and in other SQLs. But what it does is to simply say what was in the table in terms of what's this part look like right here. Give me the table name, give me this stuff, and find out what's actually in the table. So what I want to do is this. I'm going to create another query string with this in it. I'm going to send it to this connection, the one that we created up here when we opened the database, or when we created the database connection. And then this little piece right here is what happens, or a way to go about grabbing this data. There's a thing called result, which you get out of the query, and a fetch array, which gets all the results from the query, and you can do you go row by row on it to get the information that you want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to uncomment that. But I don't need to recreate that table, so I'm going to recomment that. I still need to open the table, but I don't need to create it. So let's run this thing then. I'm going to save all that. I'm going to bring this back here, and I'm going to refresh that now. And it's just going to simply go to the same code, or the new code that we've got back there, and reload it. And there's what we get. This time connection is successful. I've got a description of test that's in the code. Description of test. ID is the field. Int 11 is the type of the field. What, is it a key? Yes, it's the primary key. And can it be null? No. First is a var character of 45. Yes, and so forth. So we can easily describe that table. All right. So this may or may not be a good thing. One of the things is that, doggone it, I have to go in there and edit code to make this change like this. Well, I don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of that comment right there. And instead of having this sitting out here right in public spaces, if you will, I'm going to create a function called create table with no arguments, because it's only going to create the test table, and you can see that that will be something that needs fixed later. I'm also going to create a function up here called connect to database. And this function actually has a little bit more work to do than just to run its stuff like that, because it also needs, if we are successful, it needs to return the connection. Remember I said that was a connection object. So we're going to return that connection, and we're going to also come down here, and we might just as well make this thing the a function describe table, again with no arguments, as it will need to have later. And now we've got these methods here that we don't have to get rid of pieces of or parts of them, or get rid of them if we don't want to use them. We just call them if we need them. So let's fix this up, and right in here we'll put the global part of things, and I'm just going to say connect to database, and I'm going to say create table, and we'll just leave it at that. So let me come back over here to MySQL Workbench. We keep creating and deleting this table. It's going to get a complex delete. We're going to drop that table. Drop it now. And it's a good idea to get rid of all these things that think that table, they thought it was there when they started. You might as well get rid of those. And if we look now at um, at the IDE, we have this stuff going on here that's going to happen no matter what, but we're going to connect to the database, and then we're going to create the table, and hopefully we'll be able to get that done. One of the problems is that this guy is local and it's being returned by this guy. So I need to save that, and I really need to move it back in here as an argument. So I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to say this, oops, $, like that, and pass it in. So let's see what happens. So we'll come over here to this. Now I'm going to rerun this thing, and we'll come back over here now to MySQL Workbench. Notice that it's not there now, but we need to refresh. My golly, we got that table back, and that's nice. If we wanted to just simply see what a table was about, then we would end up with a different situation. Let's look in here. Maybe I really just want to see the description of a table. The way we had it before, we'd have to do the connection, make sure we uncommented this, and then only called describe table. But why don't we just simply say describe table here? And we're going to put this argument in here to tell it what the connection is about. Describe the table on that connection. All right, so let's save that. Let's bring this back in, and we'll run it. Oops. Hold on a minute, I'll go figure out what that is. As you can see, I typed that wrong. I should have put an I in there, MySQL I. And this thing told me that. It said undefined variable MySQL I on line 48, which is down here. I sent it in as MySQL, and it didn't know what it was, what this was, because of it. So we'll try that again. Run this, and now we've got it back, but we didn't have to recreate the table this time. However, if we were to do this, just to mess around with it, if I drop that table and then come over here and run exactly what I've got, which remember is to do the describe table without having created it, expecting it to be created, I get that, and this says test does not exist. And that's because of this code right here that says if result has something in it, in other words, it's truthy, do this stuff, else if result is falsy, then do this stuff, do this stuff, do this stuff, do this stuff, do this stuff. A good place to stop right now. We're at the very beginnings of building an API. The API that we've got is this one that has connect to database, create table, describe table. I've got these other two that I've already turned into methods, but I will give it the MySQL I, and that'll be an API for managing the tables. Okay, so next time we'll talk about some more of these things. Thank you.